You can tweak dampers for days. Take them to different tracks and still miss what they actually do. Most people think dampers are for fast and advanced drivers, chasing perfect data and histograms. But the truth is, you already drive on a particular set of dampers. No matter what kind of simulation you drive or what skill level you are, this video will help you to make a car that is calmer, easier, and more predictable. And yes, these types of cars are also faster. Not by explaining difficult theory, but a simple understanding and a way to test them. I've been sim racing for years, I've built multiple car setups across different simulators, and this is how I approach dampers. Let's go. You can only touch dampers for curbs or bumps. Dampers are just fine-tuning, they only matter once you're already fast. And all of this is true, and all of it is incomplete. Tuning dampers isn't hard because it's advanced. Explanations go way too deep and lose beginners. Or they stay too broad without any direction, or touch the topic without giving a way to practice them. Dampers aren't black magic. The simple thing is, when dampers are wrong, the car doesn't feel wrong immediately, they just become more annoying the longer you drive your car. Before we go into the presets and exercises, we really do need some foundations first. Not with numbers, not with motec, just function. They weren't lying about bump compression having to do with whenever you encounter a bump or a curb. So it means whenever you face a bump on track, the bump setting will determine how fast the wheel will go inwards into the wheel arc. You face a bump and the wheel flies up. With a soft bump, soft compression, this is gonna happen quickly. So it will absorb bumps a lot better with a soft setting. With a stiff bump, this is going to be more difficult for the tire to follow the bump. So what's gonna happen, you drive across the bump or curb and your damper is blocking the speed of the wheel going up. So this is all about velocity, and this means if the tire can't move up on this bump, then the whole car will unsettle and go up. And that's basically the difference between a stiff bump and a soft bump. Then we have rebound. And rebound is the opposite, when the wheel was going up, but now it needs to land again. So imagine we are running into this pothole. If we have a soft rebound value, the wheel will be able to go down quickly. This means it will push down as soon as there is a pothole, and now we have road contact again. When we have a stiff rebound, this is going to be prevented. So whenever we are facing that pothole, the wheel will be stuck in its wheel arch and will not have road contact anymore. Now you could think, okay, this is bad, so we always want soft bump and soft rebound. No, that's how this video is going to go, because rebound, stiffer rebound settings come with a lot of advantages as well. So most videos will treat bumps like how the car acts on bumps and on curbs. And this is all true, but it's also a very important factor for your ride height control. Now, it doesn't change the ride height itself, but it does change how fast ride heights are changing. And this is the nuance and the sauce of your car, like how snappy it is, how twitchy it is, or how forgiving it is, and how nicely rotaty it is. On the throttle, under brakes, or while steering, or all simultaneously. Before I can explain how aerodynamically your dampers going to influence and upset your car in multiple ways, you just need to understand this simple concept, is the floor effect of the car and aerodynamics. So if you have a low speed, aerodynamics don't play a big part. When you go mid-speed, it's gonna play a medium part. And at high speed, it's gonna play a massive part. Now, I have a video on this in the description if you really want to understand the aero box concept. But it basically means when ride heights shift under high speed and mid speed, this box changes from position. And see this box as a vacuum underneath the car and your car balance. So if you brake, this box shifts forward. When you accelerate, maybe from mid to high speed, it shifts backwards. And ride heights, springs, spring travel, and wing settings determine these balances on the end balance, how this position will be. But dampers will determine how fast this is gonna go. And the pace of dampers, of springs, or the pace of ride height shifts just might make your car so much better on a certain corner entry, exit, or both. First, let's talk about rebound on the rear. Rebound on the rear, this means how much dampening is the rebound, and it means how fast the wheel spring is gonna extend. And if you have a fast movement, meaning you'll have low rebound, you have a fast unsquatting car on the rear. So when you hit the brakes, the rear end of the car is gonna move up quickly. What I explained earlier with the aero box platform, that aero shift will happen quickly. When we have stiff rebound dampening, then we get a slow unsquat of the car. And if you have any knowledge about diffuser or aerodynamics, you can see that having a stiff rebound aerodynamically is very complementary to aerodynamic balance when you hit the brakes. This also counts for front rebound. So imagine we are hitting the throttle quickly, then the front is gonna unpitch quickly. So we lose lots of ride heights on the front as soon as we hit the throttle. This shifts the aerodynamic platform rearward, creating maybe some understeer. But when we have more rebound dampening on the front, we can enjoy this low ride height a little bit longer, and that would maybe make the car so much corner better in the mid to high speed corners because we're not losing the ride height so quickly on the front end of the car. Try to remember these rebound concepts with road connectivity, ability to remain certain ride height for a bit longer. Then later we'll talk about the bump and rebound combination. Because the tricky thing with dampers is you got all these different sliders, but they can just be used in accordance. And later I will also show smooth track damper presets and rough terrain damper presets. First, let's explain further. Let's talk a little bit about Motec and telemetry to prove to you that what I'm saying is actually true. So look at this top purple line. This means the speed of the car. The green line is the throttle, and this yellow line is the braking position. So this is like a trail brake, and here is like a brake, trail braking, throttle. And you see, the more I touch the throttle, the more the speed goes up. Well, that's not the point. The point is something different. Over here, on this line, this is turn 4, the second chicane of Monza, and I'm hitting the brakes here. You see the braking here? It takes up this braking zone before we are actually on the highest rear ride height. So you see here that my ride height is 77 millimeters after this type of braking. You could see how the car slowly unsquats in this braking zone, and you can also see that we almost are halfway the braking zone, and only then my ride height is at maximum 77 millimeters. The dynamic rake this is. When I'm on the soft dampers, same story, but over here I'm hitting the brakes on this point. Now, like, I immediately get this ride height change. Immediately I'm at the same ride heights, but now I'm already having that rake under heavy braking. Now, with the low rebound and soft dampers, mind you, you can also see how unstable this is. You see how this is jagging up and down, and you see this through the whole lap, basically. Now, on a straight line, that might not really be an issue, or maybe it is. So look at these differences. On the stiff dampers, we have very much controlled ride heights and slow movements. And on the soft dampers, the car is constantly jumping up and down. We have also a lot bigger spikes in ride height differences. Let's talk about a real example, because we're not having the only dampers. We have a million different setup parameters that will influence this effect. So let's talk about a simple concept. Let's talk about rake. So imagine we have a car setup with 26 millimeters of rake and 76 millimeters of ride height. If I have this car and it constantly oversteers under braking, or when I want to turn into the initial moment of the corner, maybe a fast right or left-hander, imagine Silverstone or something, and we would have too soft rebound dampening, then we get that 76 millimeters and that 26 millimeters of rake very, very quickly. That means that aerodynamically the car will pitch, the aero box shifts forward quickly, giving us a certain balance on the front axle from an aerodynamic standpoint. Now that might be too much for you, and that way you get a really twitchy car. Now, a thing you would do typically to avoid all the oversteer is, if you look at like a few of my guides, or if you look at any other setup guide, it will tell you oversteer, reduce the rear ride height. But what if you were just running the wrong damper settings? What if you just took a stiff rear damper and after like, I don't know, half a second of braking, only then you get 76 millimeters of ride height, but then you're already slowed the car down with like maybe 60, 70 kilometers, and then all of a sudden this rake isn't a problem anymore, which allows you to use this ride height for more rotation elsewhere on track. If you're liking this content this far, could you please hit that like button? That would really help me out. These videos take ages to make. And if you really want to build your own car setup from scratch and have a system, guidelines, build sheets, and more video information on how to actually build your own car setup, check the link down below, The Art of Car Setups. Let's move on. So when you're talking about dampers, they are connected with your spring stiffness. So imagine if we have a damper preset like this one. This is something I would use always. If I look at the default setup and I see the bump is way off the rebound, I'm already cautious. But think about bump as the main slider for the stiffness of your spring. So imagine if this would be a soft damper setup and this end will be a stiff damper setup, then you would think like this is 1/3. So if my spring, let's say this is 30%, then I would do spring stiffness like on number 3 out of 10. Okay? But there's a big problem with this way of thinking. It is assuming that sliders work linearly, which they not always do. But so take it as a grain of salt, but this is how I think about it. You really, if you really want to be sure, you do have to go into Motec, but I will build a sheet to make some sort of a checklist of this, but it's not finished yet. It's gonna take some time. So moving on from this is that you want to follow the spring stiffness and the bump accordingly. Meaning, if we have a super stiff spring and I want to compress that spring, it needs to be controlled with a lot more bump. Why? If I press it hard and nothing happens, and I have no bump, and then immediately I would have enough force to compress the spring, then immediately it would like go inward with no resistance. And then I get immediate ride height changes and immediate changes of that spring. That is undesirable. So that means we want to have a stiffer bump with a stiffer spring. Think about it like that. Then when springs go soft, we can go soft on the dampening. For instance, if we have a very soft spring, but we have massive amounts of rebound, then that we will never go out. You know what I mean? So that's the simple thing. Think about this default damper preset. Now this is a default damper preset. So it's a little bit, you have a smooth track, but you have some bumps you want to jump. And you really are in the gray area. You cannot really run soft dampers or stiff dampers. Let's talk about differences. With dampers, you gotta make a trade-off. And what a optimal damper window will be depends on the track. So imagine you have a very smooth track, you would use more stiffer dampers, and stiffer dampers over here, stiffer dampers would be more optimal over here. And on a bumpy track, softer dampers would give us a better window of dampening. So what does it mean? Well, if you have a very smooth track, you want that stiffness in dampers to get that ride height control, to lower the car more, to use more rake and all that stuff. And then when you go too far, then it becomes really harsh. Then it will unsettle, it will just be a too skittish ride. But same goes for too soft. When you go really soft on a bumpy track, like you don't feel anything anymore. Steering inputs might not respond. You might have a car that is really floaty and you got the oscillating wheels, like the suspension never settles, and then it's actually too soft. So think about these curvatures, and this is also the reason why you want to kind of use different damper settings per different track surfaces and situations. So let's talk about some presets to get close to the ideal situation. Not because presets are perfect, but because guessing is kind of worse. This preset as a normal preset, and you can definitely go a little bit stiffer on the front, and that will introduce some understeer or some stability on entry, or you go a little bit stiffer on the rear, and that will make the rear more playful as from a damper perspective. When you're on a smooth track like Silverstone, Qatar, or maybe Paul Ricard, or whatever track or sim you drive, think about trying to increase those rebound dampening, to have a car that is like more planted, has better ride height control under braking, under throttle, and test it out on smoother tracks. When you're on really rough terrain or you're jumping curbs and you really want that tire connectivity in the trade-off for losing some aerodynamic stability, then drop the rebound compared to the bump. This will allow for the wheels touching the surface more quickly. Don't go too extreme on the low dampening, and also bumpy tracks. I typically feel you run softer springs with them as well. So on my setups on the Sebring, I typically go a little bit softer with springs and softer with rebound compared to the bump, and I just let the fast rebound follow. A little bit of a side note on fast bump and rebound. It doesn't really make sense for me to bring this all the way up or down, or make them completely different. But yeah, more testing needed, who knows. Also, again, when you're on a really bumpy track and you have this long corner with all these bumps and like elevation changes and you have the oversteer, then stiffen up these sliders all together to get like a more stable front end. Again, same for the rear. Stiffen them all up a little bit to get a little bit unsettling rear end to give you that rotating feeling that you want. So whenever you want to test your car setup with different damper settings and you want to exercise them, these presets would bring you somewhere here on this scale. And obviously, if you really want to tweak them perfectly, then I do think you need to do some Motec. And when you're in Motec and you're looking at histograms, then you'll often find that they can go really flat on soft if you do them too low, and they would be really spiky on when they are too stiff. So if you make them too stiff or too soft. But histograms is a whole other can of worms I don't want to get into right now. Dampers are about the velocity and the speed of the suspension movement. But if you're in a car with one of my setups or one default setups or whatever setups, then at some point after multiple laps, you'll feel, and this is very personal, that the car kind of wants to do something you don't want it to do, and then you can use these presets or a variation of it to tweak those dampers a little bit to get that car just a little bit nicer for your skill level and your feeling. Please let me know in the comments what you think of this video, or if you did try them and found them useful, please let me know. And if you wanted to start from scratch and you wanted to build a GD3 car setup in pretty much every sim. I highly recommend this video. I completely also avoid Motec in that video, but the pure build system on how I built my baselines suiting for every track. Thanks for watching.